In the mid-1990s, Louisiana's juvenile prisons utilized architectural features that doubled as lethal hazards. At Tallulah Correctional Center, cells were ringed with horizontal metal pipes, fixtures that youth with suicidal tendencies frequently use to hang themselves. This photograph of a Louisiana cell reflects the conditions found by investigators. Children were locked in filth, subjected to starvation and violence, and left in a state of profound medical and mental health neglect. The inciting incident for federal intervention came in late 1995. After reading a report by Human Rights Watch detailing these abuses, former President Jimmy Carter contacted Attorney General Janet Reno to request a formal investigation. This Department of Justice control sheet from January 1996 officially logs Carter's complaint. This administrative step moved the crisis from a local secret to a priority for the Civil Rights Division. Carter's high-level pressure forced the Department of Justice to act, removing the local shield that had previously protected these facilities from federal scrutiny. By April 1996, the Department of Justice notified Governor Mike Foster that they would investigate Jetson, Swanson, and Tallulah, demanding immediate and direct access to the children confined there. Investigators uncovered a culture of systemic violence. In the Swanson facility, guards maintained a practice called a 60, where they would bribe children with a package of 60 cookies to violently attack and hospitalize other inmates. In response to these findings, the state implemented Project Zero Tolerance, a statewide initiative intended to eliminate abuse and demonstrate the state's ability to regulate itself. This 1997 findings letter confirms the failure of that initiative. An unacceptable level of violence remained at all facilities as guards moved beatings into areas not monitored by cameras. The DOJ confirmed that systemic, life-threatening staff abuse remained the standard operating procedure. These failures led the DOJ to issue an emergency warning. This October 1996 letter was sent directly to Governor Mike Foster, serving as official notice that the state's internal fixes were entirely insufficient. The findings demonstrated that voluntary state-run initiatives were incapable of dismantling an institutional culture of violence that was deeply entrenched in the system. By November 1998, the Department of Justice shifted from issuing warnings to active litigation, launching a formal federal lawsuit against the state's leadership. The DOJ utilized the Civil Rights of Institutionalized Persons Act, or CRPA. This law allows the federal government to sue state agencies to protect individuals in state custody from unconstitutional conditions and practices. Louisiana surrendered to avoid a protracted defeat in federal court. This resulted in the state signing massive, legally binding settlement agreements that mandated specific changes to facility operations. These agreements forced the state to adhere to basic standards of human decency. In Point 7 of this DOJ document, the state was legally ordered to stop using isolation and mechanical restraints for punishment or staff convenience. Point 6 placed strict limits on chemical restraints, banning the use of mace for retaliation or discipline. The extreme specificity of these mandates serves as a record of the state's prior behavior, detailing the exact methods of abuse the federal government was now forcing them to abandon. Signed agreements did not immediately result in safe conditions on the ground. Compliance required continuous physical oversight. This was demonstrated at the Louisiana Juvenile Justice Center, a privately run facility that provided services on behalf of the state of Louisiana. At Louisiana, guards deployed a tear gas grenade indoors against children while they were sleeping, a direct violation of safety protocols and human rights standards. The Department of Justice responded by demanding emergency injunctive relief, seeking a court order to halt the operations of the private contractor. The incident proved that the state was unable to manage its own private contractors without a direct federal leash. The Louisiana disaster confirmed that legal settlements are ineffective without active, physical enforcement and constant federal monitoring. To address the state's persistent incompetence, the federal court forced Louisiana to pay for a team of independent experts to monitor every facility. This flowchart demonstrates the new hierarchy of power. The federal court utilized these independent auditors to constantly inspect facilities, preventing the state from backsliding into abusive practices. This oversight created a massive financial drain. The state was forced to pay millions in legal fees to fight the DOJ, followed by millions more to implement the mandatory reforms. By the mid-2000s, this pressure led the state to adopt therapeutic and rehabilitative models for youth, moving away from the purely punitive culture of the previous decade. Institutional reform gained momentum only when the financial and legal costs of noncompliance finally eclipsed the expense of fixing the underlying problems. In 2006, a decade after the initial investigations began, the monumental lawsuit against the state of Louisiana was finally dismissed. The court ended the litigation because the state had finally reached substantial compliance with the federal agreements. The term substantial compliance denotes that the facilities had reached the constitutional bare minimums necessary to avoid violating the civil rights of those in state custody. Reaching this point required a decade of intensive litigation, thousands of court filings, and millions of dollars in mandatory federal oversight. The decade-long struggle reveals the immense administrative effort required to force a state institution to treat the children in its care with basic human dignity.